She stole a disabled parking spot right in front of me, then threatened me for calling her out. She said I was the problem. What she didn't expect. A crowd. A camera. And a cop. I'm a veteran. And this time, I refused to stay silent. The screech of tires sliced through the calm as I pulled into the pharmacy lot, already worn from a grueling physical therapy session. My muscles ached, my prosthetic rubbed uncomfortably, and all I wanted was to grab my prescription and get home. But the sound yanked my focus to a sleek black SUV that had just swung, almost arrogantly, into the only disabled parking spot. I watched as a woman in designer activewear climbed out with the ease of someone who'd just come from a massage, not a hospital.
No limp. No cane. No placard.
I sighed. Not today. There I was, stuck maneuvering into a regular space across the lot, meaning I'd have to limp nearly twice the distance on my prosthetic leg. My fingers fumbled with the straps as I tried to fasten the socket properly, the raw skin on my thigh already protesting. Then I noticed the woman. She hadn't even gone inside. She was locked in a loud debate with one of the pharmacy employees near the door. Her voice was sharp, entitled. I have every right to park here. Do you know who I am? Yes, I did. I'd seen her before. With a deep breath, I steadied myself on my cane and approached her. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she didn't know the rules. Excuse me, ma'am, I began, my tone low and respectful. I don't mean to interfere, but that spot is reserved for people with disabilities. I noticed you don't have a placard, and I could really use that space today. I nodded toward my leg, thinking that would end it. It didn't. Her eyes narrowed, her voice turned venomous. How dare you assume I'm not disabled? Not all disabilities are visible. I have just as much right to that spot as you do with your leg thing. More, actually, I got here first. She stormed off before I could say another word, clutching a yoga mat under one arm like it was some sort of badge of suffering. People were starting to notice. 2 had their phones out. Great. Just what I needed, to be the next viral confrontation on the internet. I'd lived in Oak Ridge Estates for 3 years. Quiet place. Stikwa. As a retired Army vet, I kept to myself, focused on healing, and did my best to avoid conflict. That was hard enough without petty neighborhood politics. But Karen Westfield, the HOA president, had always made things harder. She wore her position like a crown, never missing a chance to remind me that rules apply to everyone, her favorite line. When I'd asked for a small accessibility ramp last year, she'd fought it like I was proposing a helipad. Now here she was, illegally parked, carrying a yoga mat, barking at staff like she owned the building. And yes, this woman was none other than Karen Westfield. After our brief exchange, I hesitated, but then followed her to the entrance. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I also wasn't about to let this slide, not today. Mrs. Westfield, I said, catching up, I really do need that space. My prosthetic's acting up, and the walk from here is difficult after therapy. She turned, eyes flashing with recognition. Oh, it's you. The veteran who thinks the rules don't apply to him. I kept calm. The law requires a placard or license plate to use that space. Do you have one? I left it at home, she snapped. And I don't appreciate being interrogated by someone who already gets enough special treatment in our community. A few people gasped. One young woman stepped forward, speaking softly, I've been recording this. Just so you know. Karen's face turned red. Recording me? That's an invasion of privacy. I'm the president of Oak Ridge Estates, and I can make life very difficult for people who cross me. She turned back to me. You don't think I'll remember this when your next board request comes up? Before I could respond, the pharmacy manager stepped out, clearly sensing the tension. The manager stepped between us, a tall woman with tired eyes and a calm voice. Is there a problem here? Karen didn't hesitate. Yes. This man is harassing me. He doesn't believe I have a right to park in the disabled spot just because he can't see my disability. It's discrimination. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my valid placard, and gestured quietly to my prosthetic leg. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, I said evenly. Lost my leg to an IED in my final deployment. I'm just trying to get my medication and go home. That parking spot would make today a little easier. The manager gave me a look of genuine sympathy, then turned back to Karen. Ma'am, do you have a proper placard displayed in your vehicle? As I already explained, Karen snapped, rolling her eyes, I left it at home. I have PTSD from a car accident and anxiety. I need that space. And I was here first. The manager hesitated. You could see the dilemma in her eyes, torn between rules and a confrontational customer. But finally, she stood her ground. Without a placard or disabled plates, we can't allow you to park there. That space is legally reserved. Karen's voice went sharp. Are you serious? You're taking his side because he's missing a leg? My condition is just as real. I'll call the police. You don't need to, said a voice behind us. A patrol car had pulled up without anyone noticing. The officer stepping out was young, composed. His badge read Martinez. I couldn't help but overhear, he said as he approached. Is there a problem with the parking space? Karen turned toward him instantly, adopting a tremble in her voice that hadn't been there a moment ago. Yes, officer. I'm being harassed. This man, she jabbed her finger at me, thinks I don't belong in that parking space just because my disability isn't as visible as his. I'm the one being attacked. Officer Martinez didn't flinch. Sir, can I see your placard and ID? I handed both over calmly. He examined them, then returned them with a respectful nod. Thank you, sir. And thank you for your service. Then he turned to Karen. Ma'am, can I see your documentation? I already said, I left it at home, she repeated, her tone growing brittle. But I do have a legitimate condition. PTSD and anxiety. I'm not questioning that, the officer replied evenly. But the law requires documentation to be displayed to use a disabled space. Karen crossed her arms. This is absurd. I'm the president of the HOA. I know the law better than you do. Just then, a young man stepped forward from the gathering crowd. Officer, he said, holding out his phone. I have video of her jogging to her car after yoga class. About 20 minutes ago. Karen froze. The color drained from her face. Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. Is that true? The young man nodded. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the officer held up a hand and watched the footage silently. I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. The shift in Karen's body language said enough. Her righteous indignation was slipping into panic. That's not relevant, she stammered. I have good days and bad days. Yoga is part of my treatment. Officer Martinez handed the phone back. Ma'am, based on what I've heard and seen, I'm going to issue you a citation for illegal parking in a disabled space without proper documentation. That's a $300 fine. Karen gasped. This is a mistake. I know the district attorney personally. I'll fight this. Another patrol car pulled up. The crowd murmured. This was spiraling fast. Karen's voice grew louder, more shrill. This is harassment. Discrimination. You're siding with him because he has a sob story and a missing leg. I'm the real victim here. She turned to Officer Martinez, jabbing a finger toward his chest. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My husband is a senior official. He'll have your badge. That was it. The moment she crossed the line. Officer Martinez didn't flinch. Ma'am, he said, his tone suddenly firmer, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and for making physical contact with a police officer. You can't be serious. Karen screeched. You're arresting me? For standing up for my rights. Her eyes darted around the parking lot, searching for support. But the crowd had turned quiet. Most were just watching now, phones in hand, some whispering to one another. No one stepped in. Not one. Take your hands off me, she cried as Officer Martinez gently took her wrists and began reciting her rights. I'm calling my husband. I'm suing everyone. This pharmacy, this so-called veteran, the entire department. But her voice was fading beneath the sound of the second patrol car's door swinging open. She was placed gently into the back seat, still shouting through the open window. You'll regret this. All of you. Then the door shut. Silence. Officer Martinez turned back to me. Sir, can you give me a brief statement? I nodded and recounted the events plainly, no theatrics, no emotion. Just the facts. He took notes, asked a few clarifying questions, then finally gave a small nod. Well, he said, you're free to use that parking spot now. I thanked him, quietly. As the patrol cars pulled away, Karen's face barely visible through the tinted window, I stood still for a moment. The crowd began to break apart, people returning to their errands, but a few offered nods of support as they passed me. I finally made my way into the pharmacy, collected my medication, and left without further incident.
Nos shouting, no confrontation.
Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of a bell above the door. 3 days passed. Then an envelope from the HOA arrived, bold lettering, official seal. Inside, a notice, emergency board meeting, incident involving board president. It didn't say my name. But it didn't have to. The next evening, just as I sat down to rest, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a young woman, maybe early 20s, standing on my porch, eyes lowered, hands trembling slightly. Hi, she said softly. I'm Sophie. Sophie Westfield. Karen's daughter. I froze. I wanted to apologize, she continued, for what my mom did. Not just at the pharmacy. For how she's treated you since you moved in. I didn't know what to say. My first instinct was to tell her it wasn't necessary. But something about the way she stood, shoulders squared, chin slightly trembling, stopped me. She held out an envelope. This is a letter. From me. Just something I wanted you to read. To know that not everyone in my family feels the way she does. Her hand shook as she passed it to me. I accepted it, surprised by how heavy it felt. I stood there for a second, the envelope in my hand and Sophie still on my porch, her eyes flicking up to meet mine before dropping again. I cleared my throat, unsure of how to respond. Thank you, I said quietly. That means more than you probably know. She gave a small, sad smile. She was sentenced to 40 hours of community service, she said, voice barely above a whisper. And fined over $1,000. Plus, the HOA board voted her out yesterday morning. I raised my eyebrows slightly. When she found out, Sophie continued, trying not to laugh but failing just a little, she threw a vase at the wall. Shattered into a dozen pieces. She paused, then looked up at me again, her expression sobering. Maybe this will finally be the wake-up call she needs. But honestly, I don't know. We stood in silence for a moment. There was a weight in the air, the kind that only comes when shame, anger, and the hope for healing are all tangled up in the same breath. I used to be proud of her, Sophie said suddenly. When I was little, I thought she was strong, smart, fearless. But somewhere along the way, that turned into something else. Control. Image. Anger. She couldn't stand anything or anyone that didn't fit her perfect picture. I didn't want to speak for her mother. That wasn't my place. But I understood control. I understood the need for order. And I understood what happened when that order cracked. I know she treated you unfairly, Sophie said, stepping back from the door. And I'm sorry. She turned to leave, but something in me made me say her name. Sophie. She paused. You didn't have to come here. But you did. That takes guts. Her shoulders eased just slightly. Then she walked away, down the steps, across the yard, and into the dusk. I watched her go, the envelope still in my hand, the weight of it somehow heavier now. Inside, I opened it. The letter was handwritten. Neat. Honest. She described what it was like growing up with Karen Westfield as a mother. The pressure. The demands. The endless reminders that appearances mattered more than anything. And beneath that, a young girl desperate for her mother's love, trying to figure out where the woman she admired had gone. She ended the letter with a line that stopped me cold. I don't know if people can change. But I'm trying to be someone different than who raised me. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer next to my medals, next to other things I kept close but rarely showed anyone. Not because they were secret, but because they were sacred. Later that night, I received a second notice. HOA board elections would be held again in a month. They were encouraging community members to run. I read the flyer twice. Then I set it down. I never imagined myself sitting at those meetings, arguing about shrub height or mailbox paint. But maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger at stake now. Respect. Fairness. Dignity. The kind of community I'd fought for overseas. And the kind I hoped to live in now. The days that followed were quieter, but something had shifted in the air. Neighbors I barely knew began waving when I walked past. One even brought over a basket of muffins. No note, no explanation, just a gesture. Another stopped me by the mailbox and said, "Good on you." Most of us have been scared of her for years. Funny how one confrontation in a parking lot could open so many eyes. I spent that week thinking, remembering. I hadn't wanted trouble. I still didn't. I'd seen more than enough of it overseas. I'd buried friends. I'd lost a limb. I came back from war hoping only for peace. But peace doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes, it arrives with raised voices, cell phone cameras, and a citation in the mail. The HOA elections crept closer. I hadn't said anything to anyone. Not even when a neighbor slipped a nomination form into my mailbox with a sticky note that said, "You should run. You're what this place needs." I left it on the kitchen counter for 3 days, unopened. But on the 4th morning, I filled it out. The meeting hall was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall. Karen, of course, wasn't present, still serving her community service hours, I imagined. But her name hung in the air like smoke. When I stood to speak, my voice shook a little. Not from fear. From weight. "I didn't come here today to talk about rules," I began. Or bylaws. Or fines. I came to talk about respect. About seeing each other. Really seeing. We're neighbors. We chose to live here. That should mean something. I paused.
I've worn a uniform.
I've led men into danger. I've watched people die. And I've learned that courage isn't always charging into battle. Sometimes, it's asking for a parking spot when your leg aches so badly you want to scream. Sometimes, it's speaking up when you're treated like you don't belong. There was silence when I finished. Then slowly, a round of applause. Not wild. Not dramatic. Just sincere. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the stars. I thought about Karen. About Sophie. About the look on her face when she handed me that letter. About how change doesn't always come fast or easy. But it does come, sometimes from the unlikeliest people. A few days later, the election results came in. I won. Not by much, but enough. The first order of business at our inaugural meeting wasn't about fences or lawns or newsletter fonts. It was about accessibility. We passed new guidelines to make our community friendlier for people with disabilities, visible or not. And when I glanced around the room, I didn't see suspicion anymore. I saw respect. A few months later, I saw Sophie again. She was coming out of a bookstore, arms full of novels. She smiled when she saw me. "You made it," she said. I nodded. "So did you." We stood there for a while, two people shaped by someone else's mistakes, trying to carve something better from the wreckage. And maybe that's what this whole thing was really about. Not parking spaces, not board meetings, not fines. But the simple act of standing up. And refusing to sit down again.